Welcome everyone to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Debris, Season 1, Episode 7. It is called You Can Call Her Caroline. So, full spoilers for the episode, as always. And this one I thought was a nice little return to form. Which maybe sounds a bit harsh, because it's not like the last couple episodes were, bad, but I didn't think they were maybe up to the standard of the first few. And this episode I thought was very intriguing. It started with this moment where people on this pier waiting for a ferry all freeze, except the one guy. And at first I was thinking, oh, this is very much like the bus from a couple episodes ago. This is very similar. But then different things happen. Then we have the forced suicide. We have one of the people who were frozen get up and take this bag from him. And it's like, okay, what's going on? But as the mystery kind of unfolded, and Finola and Brian are investigating this guy that killed himself, and even though it's very clear in the security footage that he seemed to be struggling, it seemed like he didn't want to actually do it. Something was forcing him. And it's like, wait, are we introducing Debris that has a mind of its own, that it's controlling people? What exactly is happening? And of course, it's not the case. It's not that Debris has a mind of its own. I mean, that may end up being the case for other reasons later with other stories, but at least right now, that's not what's happening. But they go to see this character's brother, right? Who I'm going to refer to from now on as the uncle, because we also meet this guy's daughter, Caroline, as the title would imply, and he seems like a nice enough dude at first. He's a vet. He talks about being in Afghanistan. He's very concerned about his brother. He mentions that his brother found something. It's also worth mentioning that all of our main characters were kind of speculating that he was related to Influx when they showed up here, so they actually kind of came in force with lots of people. Turns out he's got nothing to do with Influx. This is just some person found some debris. That's all it is. But where this really got good for me, when I really started getting into what it was doing, was when the plot really started to kind of unfold. Is they spend time at the house, they talk to the uncle, and they ask to see the deceased guy's laptop, right? They want to see his laptop and look for his contacts and see if he's see what he's been up to. And the uncle agrees, and he gives him the laptop, the password, and all the rest of it. But they also mention that they're going to search the marsh, because the marsh behind the house is where the guy found the debris. And once they've got the laptop, they kind of say their goodbye, and we cut to them just in the car. And I actually had the thought, I'm like, wait, why aren't you searching the location that the debris was found in? Why have you just left? And I sort of shrugged it off when they were, because they're just having a conversation about stuff. The scene itself doesn't feel weird. It just felt, I just noticed that they didn't do the other main thing. There was two things they said that they had to do, and one of them wasn't done. And then all of a sudden, halfway through the scene, halfway through the conversation, Finola just goes, wait, why didn't we search the marsh? And it was a beautiful little moment of them playing something so straight, like not having like a, because later on in the episode, of course, when we discover that someone is controlling minds or convincing people to do things using debris, later on there are moments where we get, the character looks in their eyes and they have a little moment of confusion, and then it's like they've been mind wiped and they don't remember like anything other than what they've been told to remember for the last few minutes or whatever. We have those moments, but I love that this first time it happens to our main characters, it doesn't give us that weird moment to imply that something strange is happening or that something has went wrong or something mystical is afoot. It just plays completely straight, and it's there if again, like I said, I kind of really noticed that they didn't do the thing, but it was just, it almost felt like a mistake. It almost felt like a mistake the writers made, or for some reason they had to delete a scene because it was, maybe the sound was ruined, so they had to just, and they couldn't afford to ADR the whole thing, so they just went, we'll just cut the scene. That's what I was thinking. It almost took me out of the show in a weird way, because I was making reasons why they had to cut a scene, and instead it became a part of the plot where the characters went, wait, why didn't we do that? And that natural kind of realization from them when she kind of clocks that, wait, why didn't we do that? it felt so real and so natural because it's exactly how it was presented in the episode. It was a great example of the execution of the idea playing exactly into the premise of what was happening. And that's when the premise started to feel cool. It was like, okay, so someone with mind control effectively isn't exactly a new or, you know, mind-blowing concept, but the way it's portrayed in this, where characters can't really be trusted to go near them, and it's not even like there's a trick. You know, none of our characters figure something out halfway through the episode where, okay, this is how we'll get around it, or this is how we'll combat this. It just keeps happening, even when they shot with a full team, like to like drain or search the marsh. Like, they've all got their hazmat suits on and stuff. Like, all of them leave thinking there's nothing there. And perhaps it's just because it's been emptied, because we know the little girl did empty it. Because obviously, as we find out later, the uncle is the one who's using it. He's forcing the little girl to go and get it for him. And she's been hiding most of it from him, but he does get a lot of it. And obviously, we get to the details of his motivation. He wants to essentially punish higher command in the military because he blames them for all of his brothers in arms being killed based on their decisions when he was in combat. And, you know, Brian, I think, has a really good scene with them where he kind of realizes this to a point and talks to him about coming back from the darkness. And we've been kind of hinting at Brian's trauma and what he's been through throughout the show, and he tries to talk this guy down, and it feels like the first time he's kind of opened up a little bit. In fact, even in this very episode, it reminds us of how little he's willing to talk about this, because when it comes up a little bit in the first time they talk to the uncle, Finola notices that this, you know, the uncle has a reaction when he hears the unit that Brian was in, and she asks him about it in the car, and he kind of just doesn't answer. He just kind of awkwardly moves on. I think it's one of these weird things with the awkwardness sometimes from his character. I think some people don't like it. They think it's like a poor acting choice. I actually think it works really well because it feels like a really natural, awkward moment that he's just kind of like skirting the conversation or the issue and just going. But so, and then the second sort of cool, like, wait, how many people have been mind wiped? And this was another thing where I liked that the episode just presented something and then afterwards sort of pointed out why there was something wrong with it, because nothing seemed wrong with it at first. Because the other example, of course, was so we had them leaving without doing the search they were supposed to do, and then when they came back, Finola gets really scared. You know, when she's getting close to the marsh, it's some force is telling her and making her terrified, and they turn away. That was a good scene. It made it feel very omnipotent, and obviously it turns out to be a guy using mind control powers, but in the moment it felt very scary. It felt very like weird and almost like something like from like Stalker, where there's like something she can't quite put into words, but there's just a feeling of dread that's coming over her from going there. And I really like that. It gave a lot of atmosphere to this episode and made a concept that isn't even that unique really, but how they handle it throughout the episode for the most part made it feel really unique. And like I said, so the second big thing that kind of gets discovered is that they go to see the ex-wife, because the dead guy phoned his ex-wife before he died, telling them to go get their daughter. And when they go to see the ex-wife, it's a little bit odd because the ex-wife didn't go and get her daughter for a start. You think she would in this circumstance. And when they ask, well, you know, did you lose custody of your daughter? You know, is that why she was living with him? And she says, no, I fought for custody. I won custody. I fought tooth and nail. And then they look confused and they ask her, well, why is she staying there with the uncle and him? And she says, that's where she belongs. And it becomes very clear that she has been mind, you know, controlled or melded or whatever you want to call it. But it's a really cool thing because it introduced the niece, and because of the way the uncle was with the niece, where he seemed very concerned about talking to her, it played it as a very natural, oh, here's our guest stars, this is their situation. It played it just sympathetic enough. I think having him be concerned about how to break the news to her that her father was dead gave him something. It gave, and it's you know, it's not a super in-depth writing trick or anything, but it gave him one thing to hinge the character on, to not just immediately suspect that he's the evil one. And I'm not saying it's super surprising that he turned out to be the one who was behind things. Not at all, but I do think it didn't feel as TV cheap because they gave us that one thing where we're thinking about, okay, he's nervous about telling her, so he clearly cares about her. And that's a bit of a lie, he doesn't really. But that made this reveal that the daughter's not supposed to be there, and for some reason he's keeping her there. All the more kind of interesting when it sprung up. So I thought that was really neat, and it retroactively makes a lot of sense with what, you know, as we find out and piece this backstory together. The idea that this dead guy who realized he was in danger, he was trying to run away with the debris to stop his brother from doing what he's doing, and he ends up killing himself, being forced to kill himself by his brother for it. It makes sense that, you know, when he phoned his ex-wife to say go get her daughter, he was doing it out of fear. He wants his daughter to be safe. He's trying to get the ex-wife to go get the kid because he knows she's not supposed to be there. He knows this is all wrong. And maybe even the reason why the uncle mind controlled her to give up the daughter in the first place was actually almost a way to try and make peace with his brother. Like maybe you know, this brother was getting more and more concerned that the uncle character was using this stuff to do dangerous things, was planning some sort of terrorist attack effectively, and to try and almost like make his brother be quiet, he sort of gave him his daughter back, but he's so scared of what his brother's becoming that he still phoned his ex-wife and tried to, you know, fix the situation. So retroactively, that made like a really nice amount of sense, and I love that it didn't overly point that out, because it doesn't actually go out of its way to tell you, oh, he phoned his ex-wife because he was concerned about his daughter in the situation with this dangerous uncle character. They never point that out, and I really appreciate that. It's just there for you to notice that that's why he did that, and that's nice. Not everything has to be spelled out, and it naturally fits together, which is really cool. So you got that, and from there, you know, the whole team goes. Brian has that one-on-one with the uncle character where he tries to talk him down, but there's a great moment where you think he's maybe getting to him, and then eventually the uncle character just says, "You're going to go find your partner and leave. There's nothing here." Or, you know, I can't remember what the exact line was, but it was something to that effect. You know, it was the old Jedi mind trick, and they just leave and they go, and it feels really sinister because they're leaving the girl with them. And at this point, we're kind of clear that the girl has kind of been held, you know, fairly against their will at this point. And I was really into this. And it's funny because I wasn't necessarily super in love with the reveal that the uncle was just using debris. But there's a couple of details here that sort of, as it unfolded, I liked again. Like, it sort of drew me back in. One was that the debris wasn't like infinite. This stuff was like running out. Like every time he used a piece to mind control someone, it was depleting, and that's why he needed more. So I like that this is just not an infinite supply of mind control that now the government can use. Like, you know, they can maybe whip it out a few key times because they've only got limited uses. It's not just a be-all, catch-all. They have to really choose wisely where they want to use it. Although they have other techniques, as we'll get to in a little bit. But I thought this sequence where he actually comes to the military base, where Brian and Finola have been staying during this, because they're staying there overnight. And you know what, I'm kind of loving it. Brian, the running joke that Brian like eats a lot and like gorges on muffins at breakfast is growing on me. Maybe I just relate to it, I don't know. But I thought the scene where he comes to the military base is phenomenal, and one of the best scenes this show has done. I think, while the character of the uncle isn't necessarily the most super interesting in terms of just raw, like, well, character, really, you know, like he's not. I don't think the character, he's not super deep in the sense that, you know, he's an one episode guest star. He's more of a concept than a character. The concept is the soldier who's come back, who can't handle things, wants revenge, and he's going to try something drastic. But first of all, I thought the sequence of him mind controlling, presumably the pilot of a plane that's just about to land and crashing it, was a wonderful little effect. I thought that was very intimidating. He feels like a god walking through this military base. And then when Brian Finola, you know, Finola tries to like shoot him, he makes her put her gun down, and then makes a couple of other random, red shirt cops like shoot each other. And then Brian comes in and tries to like take him out. And the visual of him making Brian shoot himself, which he obviously doesn't finish, but he's making Brian put the gun to his head, which is very much like the opening sequence, and tells Finola to walk away. So we have this wonderful little set piece where Brian's trying desperately not to kill himself, but the hand's sort of coming up and he's struggling, and Finola's like almost crying, but she's walking away in the other direction. I think this is like probably in terms of like a traumatic experience together, this is probably the most like they'll be able to bond over so far, because it is this like really weird, like they're both being violated, they're both not in control of what they're doing, which I think thematically links into them taking orders and not being able to trust the people that are their superiors, Maddox and MI6 lady. I think this thematically kind of represents that. It's a nice visual showpiece of it, that they're both having strings being pulled, and they're kind of starting to only just begin to struggle. And we'll talk about that stuff separately in a second, but I do think this scene kind of represents that visually in a weird way. So I think that's a good piece of writing, and it's actually just lucky that the daughter kept a piece for herself and mind controls the uncle to kill himself before he kills Brian. So she saves the day. This little girl saves the day. And it all makes sense. I think there was like a brief moment in the middle, or just after the middle, where I was a little disappointed it was just the uncle using mind control pieces, but then they did absolutely wonderful stuff with it, and I was like, oh, you know what, no, they knew what they were doing here. They had an idea, they had a concept. I think it made for one of the best scenes of the whole show, and the sort of the standoff. The plane thing was great. It was super intimidating, and then the first half of the episode had a lot of the weird, like, what's going on, this is very ethereal, and like, we just don't understand, weird things are happening. I don't want to quite say it's like a David Lynch thing almost, because things just aren't explained and there's something odd going on. It feels a bit more fine-tuned than that, a bit more specific. Like, there is like a direct, answer we're going to have later in the episode. But I thought the way it handled that stuff by just presenting the sequencing very naturally, that it felt very refreshing when Finola turned around and said, wait, why didn't we do that? It not only justified my thought and meant that the writing was predicting perhaps what I was going to be thinking, which is very good of the writing, but it also enhanced the core concept of what it was trying to tell us, that people who were mind controlled or being convinced to do things were not realizing that it was happening to them, or they weren't remembering it after the fact. It was just, so presenting it like that, I thought was wonderful. So the main plot, I think is it the best main plot of the show so far? It's weird because it dips a little bit in the middle in a way that maybe some of the others didn't, but goddamn, the highs are so high that it might be. Finola and Brian, one of the things that I really loved about the start of this episode, I like the music in this show, and I really felt that the synth that played as Brian was walking into like the headquarters and he goes to see Maddox, I was getting almost like Deus Ex, like specifically Human Revolution vibes whenever you go to the main head office and that. Just the way he was walking through the office, and it's just like a regular office block, it's present day, but there's the synth coming in, I was getting those vibes. But I kind of liked Brian admitting to an extent to Maddox that he says he thinks that Finola and the MI6 know about her father being alive. And he kind of dances around, he just says it's intuition, he doesn't really get too specific. And I like that scene in and of itself, because I thought, yes, he's been told by Finola that maybe he can't trust Maddox, but he has too much history with him, he has too much trust in him, from before, and feels like he owes him too much to just not give him something. But he doesn't tell him that he had the conversation with Finola, he keeps all of that completely private. So I like that on its own. I think what I liked even more than that, though, is after that, as soon as he gets back to the plane, within a minute of Finola sitting down, he admits what he did. He says, look, I told Maddox this, and it's this sort of thing where he's not going to throw away this relationship he has with Maddox or the trust he has with Maddox, but, he tried to build a bridge of trust with Finola last episode, and he's trying to keep that maintained. Like, I'm not going to lie about this. This is exactly kind of what I said, because I think it's the right choice, and I'm going to keep you apprised of these choices that I'm making, but ultimately, I do think this is for the best. I can't just, betray him outright immediately. and her response, obviously, she's taken it back a little bit, but her response is ultimately okay. Like, not a happy okay, but it's kind of understanding okay. It's like, I think it's this thing where she doesn't love that he's done this, but the fact that he's willing to be open about everything that he's doing means that there's a level of trust where she's going to know where she stands with him, presumably at any point now. And that's, I think, an interesting dynamic, which I don't think most TV like pairs tend to have. At least I've not seen in a while, anyway. So I dig that. It's a little bit more nuanced, I think, than just the typical they can't trust each other, or they do trust each other, but once they trust each other, there's some layers to this where he still does have a reason to not just turn on Maddox. And MI6 lady, of course, looks very shady in this episode because there's a mysterious phone call at the end when she makes, Finola's sister calls her, says she wants her back home. But and you can tell it in the conversation, like as soon as she mentions this country house, Finola's reaction is like, wait, like, because I was thinking this place doesn't exist. This is, this is like a code word. And I think you see her sister look up at one point to imply there's someone watching this phone conversation. And Finola confirms after that it was a code word, and I like that this goes back to their childhood because it made it feel less bullshit. It made it feel like no, this is something we said when we didn't want the parents to know what we were talking about or that we were up to something. That made it feel very real because like why would adults have code words? I mean maybe two secret agents would, but your sister's not a secret agent, so that made a lot of sense to me and was intriguing. What exactly MI6 lady is up to? What is she trying to make Finola do? Why is she trying to draw Finola back? Was this a test to see how Finola was going to respond? And if so, what was she looking for exactly? What's going on? She looks really shady now. Not that Maddox is looking much better, even though, I mean, Maddox, he's torturing Ash, and it feels quite vicious. He talks about torturing people before. Also has a history in the military, clearly. He mentions terrorists and things like that, and torturing and getting information. What's interesting here, though, is that not only does it look like... Because it looks like they're just going to electrocute him, to torture him, but then they shove a piece of debris in his head. They sort of drill a little bit in his head, and they put this slice of debris in his head. And this is clearly something that they have developed from this debris that they've had for a while, which is that if they can put like an idea in your head, so what he does is he describes a church or a cathedral to him that Ash knows, and he keeps describing it. He talks about it until he's really, really thinking about it, and then on the TV screen that they've got hooked up to all the gizmos next to this debris, they get an image sort of forms out of it on the screen, and this is full on like Fringe-esque tech. I was kind of smelling during this because this is exactly the sort of we can turn the electrical impulses of his brain into an image bullshit that I love. And so he gives us this example, and then he just turns and says, all right, and he brings up Finola's father, Mr. Jones. I forget his first name, but he brings him up, and we just hear him kind of scream, and it cuts away. But by the end of the episode, we have a location, because he calls Brian, which is how this happens at the same time as the Finola phone call, and we have a location to go and possibly find some influx activity, maybe even see her father one-to-one for the first time in a moment. So I thought that was I thought that was solid stuff building. I really like the tech they used for the torture to get the information. But yeah, the main plot in this was great. I think how it was handled especially was wonderful. I found myself drawn in to this episode and drawn into the ideas it was presenting, and how it was telling its story to me was just a magnificent job of making me feel like I was figuring things out with the characters, which is not something that TV and movies always succeed at. But when it can be pulled off, I always talk about, good storytelling is a handshake. It's not very pleasant when someone just takes, puts their hand out, grabs your hand, and shakes it violently. That's not very good. It's also obviously not very good when the person just stands there and doesn't offer their hand. It really is a two-way thing. You have to, the show or the movie, the story has to extend its hand, but you have to also equally shake back. And if it doesn't give you the opportunity to do that, then it doesn't quite work. It's not as satisfying. It's not as fulfilling. And I think this episode was a great example of a plot of the week pulling a lot of that off. So, yeah. I mean, this is the sort of thing where this guy could be the villain for a whole season on this show, or even any other show for that matter. The way they presented him as a threat, like he could be like the big nemesis of like a superhero. But we have just regular people having to deal with them, and it made it very scary because no one really had a solution. And it was only because the niece, the daughter, Caroline, only because she had the foresight to put a stop to what he was doing. So, and then maybe in some ways having some of our own traumatic experiences, like our uncle and our father seem to have. So there you go. That's Debris, episode 7. Very, very good episode. I am looking forward to the next few because we have. I mean, I'm just double checking if this is a 10 or 13 episode season that we've got planned here. It's 13. I'm happy because that means I have 6 more. I was worried it was only going to be 3 more. I'm happy there's at least 6 more episodes of this. So let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments below. Please do like and subscribe, all that stuff. Get us on the Twitters at mailed_fuzz for channel updates. If you want to support the show, obviously, like I said, liking, subscribing does that a lot on YouTube. It's completely free and it does help us a lot. But you can, of course, also support us financially over at patreon.com/mailfuzztv, where you can keep everything going by giving as little as $1 per month. So thank you very much for joining. We will see you next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?